My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I serve as the president of Burkina Faso, a nation that has known struggle, sacrifice, hope, and resilience. Throughout my life, I have learned that leadership is not measured by the size of a country's economy, the strength of its military, or the influence it possesses on the international stage. Leadership is measured by the choices a person makes when faced with moments that test conscience, character, and conviction. Today, I want to share with you a story that changed me. It happened during the year 2026. Many people have heard rumors about what took place. Others have read headlines or listened to different versions told by different voices. But I believe some stories should be told directly by the person who lived them. This is one of those stories. The events took place in Brussels, Belgium. I had received an invitation to attend what was described as an emergency meeting involving influential political leaders, senior government officials, international advisors, and representatives from several major institutions. The purpose of the gathering, according to the organizers, was to discuss peace, development, security, and the future of cooperation between Africa and Western nations. On the surface, it sounded like an important opportunity. I accepted the invitation because I believed Burkina Faso deserved to be represented wherever serious conversations about the future of our world were taking place. I traveled to Brussels carrying the concerns of my people. I thought about the farmers working under difficult conditions. I thought about families seeking stability. I thought about young people hoping for better opportunities. I believe this meeting would allow me to present perspectives that are often ignored by powerful circles. When I arrived at the conference center, security was extremely tight. Officials moved carefully through corridors. Delegations from different countries filled the building. Every detail seemed designed to communicate importance and urgency. The atmosphere suggested that meaningful discussions were about to take place. As I entered the meeting hall, I greeted people respectfully. Some faces were familiar. Others were meeting me for the first time. There were formal handshakes, brief conversations, and the usual exchanges that occur before international meetings begin. At that moment, I had no reason to believe that anything unusual would happen. I expected disagreements. I expected different opinions. I expected difficult conversations. That is normal in politics. People from different nations rarely agree on everything. But disagreement is not the same as disrespect. A difference of opinion is not the same as contempt. I believed everyone present understood that distinction. For the first part of the meeting, everything appeared normal. The discussions focused on economics, security concerns, regional conflicts, trade relationships, and international partnerships. People presented reports, experts shared data, officials debated strategies. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet as the hours passed, the tone of the conversation slowly began to change. The discussion started moving away from practical issues and toward broader subjects involving culture, identity, values, and religion. At first, I simply listened. A leader must know when to speak and when to observe. I chose to observe. What I heard during the next stage of that meeting would eventually lead me to make a decision that surprised everyone in the room. It was not a decision motivated by anger. It was not a decision motivated by politics. It was not even a decision motivated by national interest. It came from something much deeper. It came from conscience. Because sometimes there are moments in life when remaining seated becomes harder than standing up. Sometimes silence becomes heavier than words. Sometimes a person reaches a point where continuing to participate feels like a betrayal of what they believe. That day in Brussels became one of those moments for me. Before I tell you exactly what happened, I ask you to listen carefully to this story and reflect on it for yourself. Whether you live in Africa, America, Europe, or anywhere else in the world, the questions raised by that day concern more than politics. They concern dignity. They concern faith. They concern respect. And they concern the choices each of us makes when confronted with something that challenges our deepest convictions. What happened next is something I will never forget. As I mentioned earlier, my journey to Brussels began with what appeared to be a sincere invitation. Several weeks before the meeting, my office received official communication from organizers representing a coalition of Western institutions and international partners. The message described an emergency gathering intended to address growing global challenges and strengthen cooperation between nations. The invitation carried significance. Many countries had been invited, but only a limited number of leaders were asked to participate in the central discussions. Burkina Faso was among them. When my advisors first presented the invitation to me, we spent time reviewing its objectives. The documents emphasized dialogue, mutual respect, development, security, and long-term partnership. Those are subjects that matter deeply to any leader who genuinely cares about the future of his people. For many years, Africa has often found itself discussed by others rather than listened to directly. Decisions affecting African nations have frequently been debated in rooms far away from African communities. Policies have been designed without fully understanding the realities experienced by ordinary people. Because of that history, I believed it was important to attend. I did not travel to Brussels seeking praise. I did not travel there hoping to impress anyone. I traveled because I believed the concerns of Burkina Faso deserved to be heard. I wanted to speak about security. I wanted to speak about development. I wanted to speak about dignity. Most importantly, I wanted to remind influential leaders that every statistic discussed in international meetings represents real human lives. Behind every economic report is a family. Behind every policy decision is a community. Behind every conflict is a mother praying for peace. Those realities cannot be forgotten. As preparations continued, my team worked carefully. We reviewed briefing documents. We studied discussion topics. We examined the challenges likely to be raised during the meeting. Everything suggested that the gathering would focus on serious issues affecting the future of multiple regions around the world. Nothing in the invitation hinted at controversy involving faith. Nothing suggested that religion would become a central topic. Nothing warned that respect for deeply held beliefs might be questioned. That is why what happened later was so surprising. The journey itself was uneventful. When our delegation arrived in Brussels, we were greeted by officials responsible for coordinating the event. The city was busy as always. Government vehicles moved through the streets. Security personnel were visible throughout the area surrounding the conference center. International gatherings often involve extensive precautions, and this meeting was no exception. The venue itself reflected the importance attached to the event. The building was modern, heavily secured, and designed to host large diplomatic gatherings. Representatives from many nations moved through its halls. Translators prepared equipment. Journalists waited outside designated areas. Advisors reviewed documents one final time before discussions began. Everything appeared professional. Everything appeared organized. Everything appeared focused on cooperation. As I walked through the corridors, I reflected on the responsibility I carried. Leadership is often misunderstood. Many people imagine leadership as authority. Others imagine it as influence. But true leadership frequently feels more like responsibility than power. When I entered that building, I was not thinking about myself. I was thinking about the people whose voices are rarely heard in international forums. I thought about rural communities in Burkina Faso. I thought about teachers working with limited resources. I thought about young people searching for opportunity. I thought about families hoping for a future better than their past. Those thoughts remained with me as I entered the main hall. The opening moments of the gathering were formal. Introductions were made. Delegations were acknowledged. Speakers welcomed participants and emphasized the importance of cooperation during uncertain times. The language used throughout these opening remarks sounded encouraging. Words such as partnership, respect, dialogue, inclusion, and shared responsibility were repeated frequently. Many participants nodded in agreement. The atmosphere appeared positive. I listened carefully. Over the years, I have learned that speeches often reveal less than actions. Promises are easy. Commitment is harder. Respect is easy to proclaim. It is much harder to demonstrate when differences arise. Still, I remain hopeful. I believed meaningful conversations could take place. I believed different nations could exchange ideas honestly while maintaining mutual respect. I believe the organizers were sincere when they spoke about building stronger relationships. At several points during the opening discussions, participants spoke about the importance of understanding different cultures. Others emphasized tolerance. Some spoke about protecting human dignity. Those statements sounded admirable. In fact, I agreed with many of them. A world without respect eventually becomes a world filled with division. A society that loses dignity eventually loses stability. A leader who ignores the humanity of others eventually loses credibility. These principles seemed self-evident. As the first sessions continued, conversations focused on economic uncertainty, regional security concerns, migration, trade partnerships, and technological change. Experts presented reports. Officials debated possible solutions. Questions were asked. Opinions differed. Yet the discussions remained civil. There was disagreement, but there was also professionalism. At that stage, nothing seemed unusual. Several times, participants referenced the need for stronger cooperation between Africa and Western nations. I welcome those discussions. Constructive cooperation benefits everyone when it is based on fairness and mutual respect. No region can solve every challenge alone. No nation possesses all wisdom. Progress often requires dialogue between people with different experiences and perspectives. That was one reason I had accepted the invitation. I believed dialogue was possible. As the hours passed, however, I began noticing subtle changes. The shift was gradual. At first, it was barely noticeable. Certain speakers started moving away from practical policy issues. Their comments became more philosophical, then more cultural, then increasingly focused on questions about values, belief systems, and religion. Initially, I paid little attention. Religion has always been an important part of human history. Discussing it is not unusual. People may hold different beliefs and still engage respectfully. I had participated in many conversations involving faith before. Such discussions do not automatically create conflict, but something about the tone began to concern me. The language became less respectful. Certain comments drew laughter from parts of the audience. Some speakers appeared more interested in dismissing beliefs than understanding them. At first, the remarks were subtle. Then they became increasingly direct. I remember sitting quietly, observing faces around the room. Some participants seemed uncomfortable. Others appeared entertained. A few seemed eager to push the discussion further. That was the moment I realized the meeting was beginning to move in a direction I had not expected. The gathering I had entered with optimism was slowly becoming something else. I did not yet know how far the conversation would go. I did not yet know what would soon be said, but I could already feel a growing tension within me. The subjects being discussed were no longer merely political. They were touching something deeper. They were approaching beliefs that millions of people hold sacred. And as I sat there listening, I found myself wondering whether the principles of respect repeatedly praised during the opening speeches would still apply once those beliefs entered the conversation. The answer to that question would arrive sooner than anyone expected. And when it did, the atmosphere inside that room changed completely. The events that followed would ultimately lead me to make a decision that surprised every person present. That decision did not begin with anger. It began with listening. It began with observation. And it began with a growing realization that respect is often tested most severely when people encounter beliefs they do not share. That realization stayed with me as the discussion continued. What happened next marked the beginning of a moment that I will remember for the rest of my life. The meeting was no longer heading where anyone expected, and the true test had not even begun. As the afternoon continued, the atmosphere inside the conference hall became noticeably different from the one that had existed when the meeting first began. The discussions about economics, security, trade, and international cooperation slowly moved into broader conversations about society, culture, education, and belief systems. At first, this transition seemed natural. After all, no nation exists solely through economics. No society is built only on military strength. Human beings are shaped not only by policies and institutions, but also by values, traditions, convictions, and faith. For that reason, I remained attentive. I believed these subjects could be discussed respectfully. I believed thoughtful dialogue could help people better understand one another. Unfortunately, that was not the direction the conversation ultimately took. One speaker began by arguing that modern societies should rely less on traditional moral foundations and more on systems designed entirely around technological progress and administrative control. His presentation was delivered confidently. Several participants appeared impressed. Others nodded as he spoke. At first, nothing he said seemed especially controversial. People have different ideas about how societies should develop. That is normal. What concerned me was not the existence of different opinions. It was the attitude that gradually emerged beneath those opinions. As the discussion progressed, certain speakers began describing faith as something outdated. They spoke about religion as though it were merely a historical tool used to influence populations. Some suggested that spiritual belief had little place in modern public life. Others claimed that faith belonged to a past era and that humanity should move beyond it entirely. Again, I remained silent. Listening is an important responsibility. Not every disagreement requires an immediate response. Not every statement deserves interruption. I wanted to understand exactly where the conversation was heading, so I listened. What I noticed was that the tone was becoming increasingly dismissive. The discussion was no longer focused on understanding religious communities. It was no longer focused on examining history objectively. Instead, some participants seemed intent on reducing faith to a caricature. Complex beliefs held by billions of people were being summarized with careless assumptions. Deep spiritual convictions were being treated as intellectual weaknesses. The room itself reflected this change. Earlier in the day, participants had spoken carefully. Now certain comments were followed by smirks. Occasionally, laughter emerged after remarks directed toward religious traditions. Not everyone participated. Many remained professional. Many remained respectful. But enough people joined the laughter that the atmosphere shifted. I remember looking around the room. Some delegates exchanged amused glances. Others stared at their notes. A few appeared uncomfortable but chose not to speak. Their silence caught my attention, because silence often reveals as much as words. When people sense something is wrong yet say nothing, a room can become strangely heavy. That was the feeling beginning to settle over the meeting. One speaker argued that religious values were obstacles to progress. Another suggested that faith encouraged people to accept hardship rather than challenge injustice. A third claimed that modern society should move beyond concepts rooted in spiritual traditions. The language varied. The message remained similar. Faith was increasingly being portrayed as something inferior, something outdated, something unnecessary. As I listened, I thought about the people I knew back home. I thought about ordinary citizens whose faith gave them strength during difficult times. I thought about families who gathered to pray despite uncertainty. I thought about communities that found hope through belief when material circumstances offered little comfort. Were those people less intelligent because they believed? Were they less worthy of respect because they trusted in something greater than themselves? I did not believe so. In fact, many of the strongest people I have ever met were people of faith. They endured hardship without losing compassion. They faced suffering without surrendering dignity. They confronted uncertainty without abandoning hope. Their faith did not weaken them. It strengthened them. As these thoughts crossed my mind, another participant stood to speak. His comments would further accelerate the change occurring within the room. He argued that religion survived primarily because people feared uncertainty. According to him, belief systems offered emotional comfort but little practical value. Several people laughed. Others applauded lightly. The reaction troubled me, not because everyone needed to agree with faith. People are free to believe differently. What troubled me was the growing contempt. Disagreement can coexist with respect. Contempt cannot. Once contempt enters a conversation, meaningful dialogue begins to disappear. Instead of seeking understanding, people begin seeking superiority. That seemed increasingly evident. The discussion was no longer exploring ideas. It was judging them. It was not asking questions. It was issuing dismissals. I noticed that very few participants challenged these remarks. Perhaps some agreed. Perhaps others preferred to avoid controversy. Whatever the reason, the imbalance became more obvious with each passing minute. Voices defending faith were largely absent. Voices criticizing faith were becoming louder. I remained quiet, not because I lacked opinions, not because I was indifferent. I remained quiet because I believed patience was important. A leader must avoid reacting emotionally. A leader must understand fully before responding. So I continued listening. The conversation then moved toward broader cultural questions. Several speakers argued that traditional values were barriers to social progress. Others criticized communities that continued to place significant importance on religious teachings. Once again, laughter occasionally followed comments directed toward beliefs held by millions around the world. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. What had begun as policy discussion had evolved into something very different. The language of respect promoted during the opening speeches seemed increasingly absent. I found myself reflecting on a simple question. If genuine diversity matters, does it include diversity of belief? If inclusion matters, does it include people of faith? If respect matters, does it extend to convictions that some individuals personally reject? Those questions remained in my mind as the discussion continued. I looked around the hall again. Representatives from many nations sat together. People from different cultures. People from different backgrounds. People carrying different experiences. Yet despite all this diversity, certain beliefs appeared to be treated as acceptable targets for ridicule. That contradiction became increasingly difficult to ignore. The irony was striking. Many speakers spoke passionately about tolerance, yet some of the same individuals seemed remarkably intolerant toward faith. Many spoke about dignity, yet little dignity was being shown toward beliefs held by billions of human beings. Many spoke about understanding, yet few seemed interested in understanding why faith remains important to so many people. The contradiction lingered in the room. Perhaps some noticed it, perhaps others did not. I certainly noticed it. As the conversation advanced, my concern deepened. Not because anyone had criticized me personally. No one had. Not because anyone had attacked Burkina Faso. They had not. The issue was larger than politics. It was larger than national interests. The issue was respect. Respect for people, respect for conscience, respect for convictions that shape countless lives around the world. I still hope the discussion might return to a more balanced tone. I still believe someone might redirect the conversation. I still believe the principles repeatedly praised earlier in the day might reappear. But that did not happen. Instead, the comments became more direct. The laughter became more noticeable. The dismissive tone became harder to ignore. And then the conversation approached a subject that would change everything. A subject sacred to millions across Africa, America, Europe, Asia, and beyond. A subject sacred to many people sitting silently in that very room. The name of Jesus Christ was about to enter the discussion. And once it did, the meeting would never be the same again. I did not know exactly what would be said. I did not know how far certain individuals were willing to go. But I sensed that a line was approaching. A line between disagreement and disrespect. A line between discussion and mockery. A line between dialogue and contempt. Within a short time, that line would be crossed. And when it was crossed, I would find myself facing one of the most difficult decisions of my public life. The room continued listening. The speakers continued talking. The delegates remained seated. Yet beneath the surface, something important was changing. The meeting was no longer about policy. It was becoming a test of conscience. And the most difficult moment was still ahead. There are moments in life when a room can change in a matter of seconds. Not because the walls move, not because the people leave, but because something is said that reveals what has been hidden beneath the surface all along. That is exactly what happened in Brussels. The discussion had already drifted far from the subjects that brought us there. The atmosphere had become increasingly dismissive toward faith. Still, I believed there were limits that serious leaders would not cross. I believed that even those who disagreed with religion would understand the importance of showing basic respect toward the beliefs of others. For a time, I held on to that belief. Then one senior official requested the floor. He was a well-known figure. His words carried influence. People listened when he spoke. The room grew quiet as he began addressing the broader relationship between religion, culture, and political development. At first, his comments sounded similar to those that had already been made. He questioned the role of faith in modern society. He criticized religious institutions. He argued that humanity should rely more heavily on scientific and political systems. Those arguments were not new. People have made them for many years. What came next was different. His tone changed. His language became sharper. Then, without hesitation, he referred directly to Jesus Christ. The way he spoke, the name immediately caught my attention. It was not the tone of someone engaging in thoughtful criticism. It was not the tone of someone seeking understanding. It was the tone of mockery. Several people noticed it immediately. I could see reactions around the room. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others looked down at their documents. A few exchanged glances. The official continued speaking. He referred to the teachings of Jesus as though they were naive ideas that belonged to another age. He questioned the value of forgiveness. He spoke dismissively about mercy. He treated humility as weakness. He suggested that principles taught by Christ had little relevance in a world driven by power and competition. Then came the laughter, not from everyone, but from enough people that it became impossible to ignore. The sound echoed through the room. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Mockery rarely requires volume. A small amount is often enough. As I sat there listening, I felt a heaviness settle over me. I was not angry, at least not yet. What I felt first was disappointment, deep disappointment, because I realized that many of the speeches about respect, inclusion, and dignity delivered earlier that day had apparently come with conditions. Respect seemed available only for beliefs approved by certain people. Tolerance seemed available only for ideas they preferred. The contradiction was impossible to miss. The official continued speaking. He suggested that people who still relied on spiritual teachings were holding society back. He implied that faith represented an obstacle rather than a source of strength. Again, several participants laughed. Others smiled. A few appeared uncomfortable. Very few objected. That silence struck me. Not because everyone needed to defend Christianity. People have the right to disagree. People have the right to reject religious beliefs. That is their freedom. What troubled me was the absence of basic respect. One does not need to share another person's faith to acknowledge its importance. One does not need to believe as others believe in order to treat them with dignity. That principle seemed forgotten. As the comments continued, my thoughts traveled far from Brussels. I thought about villages in Burkina Faso. I thought about churches filled with ordinary people. I thought about elderly men and women praying quietly for their families. I thought about children learning lessons about kindness and compassion. I thought about communities facing hardship yet refusing to surrender hope. Many of those people draw strength from faith. Many find comfort in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Many rely on those teachings when circumstances offer little reason for optimism. Were those people deserving of ridicule? I did not believe so. I never will. The official eventually finished speaking. For a brief moment, the room became quiet. Then another participant added his own comments. Instead of moderating the discussion, he pushed it further. He questioned whether concepts such as forgiveness and mercy had any practical value in modern leadership. He described those principles as unrealistic. Again, there were smiles. Again, there was laughter. Again, there was silence from many who knew better. I remember looking around the room carefully. What I saw troubled me more than the words themselves. I saw intelligent people treating deeply held beliefs as entertainment. I saw educated individuals dismissing convictions that have guided countless lives. I saw people speaking confidently about faith without demonstrating any serious understanding of why it matters to so many. Most importantly, I saw how easily respect disappeared when the subject was Christianity. Had similar remarks been directed towards certain other groups, many participants would have objected immediately. Had similar mockery targeted different communities, there would likely have been calls for sensitivity and understanding. Yet because the target was Jesus Christ and the faith of millions, many seemed comfortable laughing. That realization stayed with me. The issue was no longer religion alone. The issue was consistency. The issue was integrity. The issue was whether principles are applied equally or only when convenient. As the discussion continued, another speaker referenced Christian teachings in a sarcastic manner. His comments drew more laughter. At that moment, something became clear to me. The problem was not a single remark. The problem was a culture of contempt that had quietly developed within the conversation. One comment might have been dismissed as poor judgment. Two comments might have been accidental. But by now, a pattern had emerged. The mockery was intentional. The disrespect was intentional. The laughter was intentional. And everyone in the room knew it. I sat silently. Not because I approved. Not because I agreed. I sat silently because I was thinking carefully about what should happen next. Leadership often requires restraint. The easiest response is frequently the emotional one. The harder response is the thoughtful one. I knew that whatever decision I made would carry consequences. I knew people would interpret it differently. Some would agree. Others would criticize. That was inevitable. Yet another thought entered my mind. What message would my silence send? What would it communicate if I remained seated while sacred beliefs were openly mocked? What would it say to the millions of people whose faith helps them endure suffering? What would it say to those who pray every day for peace, strength, and hope? Those questions became increasingly difficult to ignore. I was not thinking about politics. I was not calculating public reactions. I was not considering headlines. I was thinking about conscience. Conscience often speaks quietly. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. But when a person ignores it long enough, something important begins to disappear. I have always believed that leadership without conscience eventually becomes dangerous. A leader may possess power. A leader may possess influence. A leader may possess wealth. Yet without conscience, none of those things provide moral direction. As the conversation continued, I found myself asking a simple question. If I cannot defend respect when it matters, what value do my principles truly possess? The answer seemed obvious. Principles only matter when they cost something. They matter when remaining faithful to them becomes uncomfortable. They matter when standing by them requires courage. Anyone can defend a belief when doing so is easy. The real test comes when defending it creates consequences. That test was now sitting directly in front of me. The room continued discussing Jesus Christ as though his teachings deserved ridicule. The laughter continued. The dismissive remarks continued. And within me, a decision was slowly taking shape. I did not yet know exactly what I would say. I did not yet know exactly what I would do. But I knew one thing. My conscience was becoming increasingly unwilling to remain silent. The voices around me continued speaking. Yet my attention had shifted elsewhere. I was no longer focused on the arguments being made. I was thinking about the people whose faith was being mocked. I was thinking about what respect truly means. I was thinking about whether remaining seated was still the right choice. The answer was beginning to emerge. And once it emerged completely, everything would change. The moment was approaching. The room did not realize it. The speakers did not realize it. And before long, I would no longer be sitting in that chair. As the voices continued around me, I found myself listening less to the speakers and more to the thoughts forming quietly within my own mind. The room had not changed physically. The delegates remained seated. The presentations continued. The microphones remained active. Yet for me, something had shifted. The discussion was no longer about policy, diplomacy, or international cooperation. It had become a question of conscience. I sat there in silence, looking toward the front of the hall, while my thoughts traveled thousands of miles away from Brussels. I was no longer seeing conference tables and official documents. I was seeing people, ordinary people, the kind of people who rarely appear in international meetings, the kind of people whose names never appear in headlines, the kind of people whose faith remains strong even when their circumstances are difficult. The first image that came to mind was a mother, not a particular mother. Rather, the many mothers I have met throughout Burkina Faso, women who wake before sunrise, women who work tirelessly for their families, women who carry responsibilities few people fully understand. Many of them live with uncertainty. Many face challenges that would discourage others. Yet despite those hardships, they continue praying. They pray for their children. They pray for safety. They pray for strength. They pray for a future better than the present. I have seen those prayers. I have witnessed them personally. I have stood among people whose faith remained intact despite poverty, conflict, and hardship. As I sat in Brussels listening to laughter directed toward Jesus Christ, I thought about those women. I imagined them kneeling quietly in small churches. I imagined them bowing their heads in simple homes. I imagined them asking God to watch over their families. What would they think if they could hear what was being said in that room? The question remained with me. Then I thought about the churches scattered throughout rural Africa. Many are not large. Many are not impressive by worldly standards. Some have simple wooden benches. Some have modest roofs. Some gather beneath structures built through sacrifice and determination. Yet inside those places, people find hope. Inside those places, people find community. Inside those places, people find reasons to continue moving forward. I remembered visiting communities where families possessed very little materially, yet possessed remarkable faith. I remembered hearing prayers offered with sincerity. I remembered seeing people support one another during times of hardship. Their faith was not a performance. It was not a political statement. It was not an intellectual exercise. It was something deeply personal, something deeply real, something deeply important. As those memories surfaced, the laughter in the conference room seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. The people mocking faith were discussing ideas. The people I was remembering were living realities. That difference matters. Very often, intellectual debates occur far away from the lives they affect. Concepts become abstract. Human experiences become statistics. Beliefs become subjects for analysis rather than sources of meaning. Yet for millions of people around the world, faith is not abstract. Faith helps them survive. Faith helps them endure. Faith helps them forgive. Faith helps them hope. I thought about individuals facing illness. I thought about families grieving losses. I thought about communities recovering from violence. Many of those people turn toward God not because life is easy, but because life is difficult. They pray because they need strength. They pray because they need comfort. They pray because they refuse to surrender to despair. The more I reflected on these realities, the more distant the conversation in Brussels seemed. Not because it lacked intelligence. Many people in that room were intelligent. Not because it lacked influence. Many people in that room possessed influence. What it lacked was humility. Humility requires recognizing that not every truth can be measured by power. Not every value can be calculated by efficiency. Not every source of strength can be reduced to data. Faith exists in a place beyond many of those measurements. That is one reason it endures. I thought about another group of people, young men and women, students, workers, dreamers, people trying to build meaningful lives. Many of them face uncertainty about the future. Many struggle with fear, anxiety, and discouragement. For some, faith provides direction. For others, faith provides stability. For many, faith provides hope during moments when hope seems difficult to find elsewhere. Were those people deserving of ridicule? Again, the answer felt obvious. No. They were deserving of respect. Whether one shared their beliefs or not, respect remained essential. That conviction grew stronger with each passing moment. As I sat there, another memory surfaced. I remembered speaking with individuals who had survived tremendous suffering. Some had lost loved ones. Some had endured violence. Some had experienced displacement and hardship. When I asked how they continued moving forward, many gave similar answers. They spoke about prayer. They spoke about faith. They spoke about trusting God even when circumstances appeared hopeless. Their faith did not erase their pain. It did not magically solve every problem, but it gave them the strength to continue. That strength should never be mocked. It should never become entertainment. It should never be treated with contempt. The room around me continued its discussion. More comments were made. More observations were offered, yet my attention remained fixed on these reflections. Because the issue was no longer merely about Jesus Christ being mocked. The issue was about the millions of people whose lives are shaped by faith in Him. The issue was about whether those people deserve respect. The issue was about whether dignity applies equally to everyone. As I reflected, another question emerged. How could I continue sitting there while something sacred to so many was being treated as a joke? The question was uncomfortable. Because once a person asks such a question honestly, avoiding the answer becomes difficult. I tried to examine my thoughts carefully. I did not want emotion to control my judgment. I did not want pride to influence my decision. I did not want anger to dictate my actions. I wanted clarity. I wanted honesty. I wanted to know what conscience required. The answer gradually became clearer. Remaining seated was becoming increasingly difficult. Not physically, morally. There is a difference. A person can remain physically comfortable while becoming spiritually uncomfortable. A person can remain silent outwardly while experiencing conflict inwardly. That conflict was growing within me. I remembered something I had learned many years earlier. Respect is not tested when everyone agrees. Respect is tested when people disagree. Anyone can show kindness toward those who share the same beliefs. The true challenge comes when encountering beliefs one does not share. That challenge was failing in the room around me. The speakers were free to disagree with Christianity. That was never the issue. The issue was mockery. The issue was contempt. The issue was treating faith as something deserving laughter rather than respect. I found myself wondering how history would judge such moments. Not the political decisions, not the policy debates, but the attitude, the willingness to dismiss the convictions of others. History has repeatedly shown the dangers of such thinking. Whenever people begin believing that certain groups deserve less respect, division follows. Whenever dignity becomes selective, conflict grows. Whenever humility disappears, arrogance eventually takes its place. Those lessons are not new. Humanity has learned them many times. Yet humanity continues forgetting them. The irony of the situation became increasingly clear. The meeting had been organized in the name of cooperation. Yet cooperation cannot survive without mutual respect. The meeting had emphasized inclusion, yet inclusion without respect becomes little more than a slogan. The meeting had celebrated diversity, yet genuine diversity includes people whose beliefs differ from our own. Without that understanding, diversity becomes superficial. These thoughts remained with me. The more I reflected, the more certain I became that something needed to happen. Not because I wanted confrontation. I did not. Not because I wanted attention. I did not. Not because I wished to create a scene. I certainly did not. I simply knew that there are moments when silence begins to communicate the wrong message. There are moments when remaining seated appears to endorse what is taking place. There are moments when conscience quietly says enough. I was approaching such a moment. The realization settled over me gradually. Then, firmly, I could feel the decision taking shape. Not suddenly, not emotionally, but steadily. Like a truth becoming impossible to ignore, the room continued speaking. The delegates continued listening. The meeting continued moving forward. Yet inside me, something had already changed. I was no longer asking whether I should respond. I was beginning to ask how. Because the more I thought about the people praying across Burkina Faso, across Africa, across America, and across the world, the more certain I became that remaining silent was no longer the right choice. The time for reflection was nearing its end. The time for action was approaching. And soon every person in that room would know exactly where I stood. There comes a moment when a decision that has been forming quietly inside a person finally becomes impossible to delay. For me, that moment arrived in Brussels. The discussion continued moving in the same direction. The dismissive remarks continued. The atmosphere remained unchanged. Some participants appeared comfortable. Others remained silent. A few seemed amused. I sat listening for several more minutes, giving myself every opportunity to remain patient. I wanted to be certain. I wanted to act from conviction rather than emotion. I wanted to ensure that whatever happened next would reflect conscience and not anger. That distinction mattered to me. Anger often seeks to punish. Conscience seeks to remain faithful. I had no desire to punish anyone. I had no interest in humiliating anyone. I simply knew that I could not continue pretending that nothing important was happening. The room had crossed a line, not a political line, not a diplomatic line, a moral line. Respect had given way to ridicule. Dialogue had given way to contempt, and my silence was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. I looked around the hall one more time. Representatives from many nations remained seated behind their nameplates. Advisors reviewed notes. Officials listened through translation devices. The setting remained orderly and professional. Yet beneath that appearance, something essential had been lost. Respect. Without respect, even the most sophisticated conversation becomes hollow. Without respect, cooperation becomes fragile. Without respect, trust begins to disappear. Those thoughts moved through my mind as I reached my decision. I remember taking a slow breath. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted clarity. I wanted my actions to reflect exactly what I believed. Nothing more, nothing less. Then I rose from my chair. The movement itself was simple. There was no dramatic gesture. There was no attempt to draw attention. I simply stood, yet almost immediately people noticed. Movement attracts attention in formal meetings, especially when everyone else remains seated. Several delegates turned toward me. Others paused their conversations. A few speakers stopped momentarily. The room sensed that something unusual was happening. For a brief moment, there was uncertainty. People seemed unsure whether I intended to ask a question, make a statement, or leave. I remained standing. The silence grew. More faces turned in my direction. I could feel the attention of the room without looking directly at everyone. Then I spoke. My voice was calm. That was important. I did not want anger to become the story. I wanted the principle to remain the story. So I spoke calmly. I said that I could accept criticism directed toward me personally. Public life requires that. Any leader who cannot tolerate criticism should not seek leadership. I explained that disagreements about politics did not trouble me. Nations have different interests. Leaders have different priorities. Debate is normal. Disagreement is healthy. Reasonable people will not always reach the same conclusions. I also said that criticism directed toward Burkina Faso would not cause me to react emotionally. Every nation faces scrutiny. Every government faces questions. That is part of international dialogue. Then I addressed the issue that had compelled me to stand. I said that there is a difference between disagreement and mockery. There is a difference between criticism and contempt. There is a difference between discussing faith and ridiculing it. The room remained silent. No one interrupted. No one laughed. The atmosphere had changed completely. I continued speaking. I explained that millions of people around the world place great importance on their faith. Many find strength through belief. Many find hope through prayer. Many find guidance through the teachings of Jesus Christ. Whether one shares those beliefs or not, they deserve respect. I remember saying something that reflected exactly what I felt. I said that I could not remain seated while sacred beliefs were being treated as entertainment. I could not participate in a conversation that reduced the faith of millions to a joke. I could not pretend that respect mattered only when it was convenient. The room grew even quieter. Some participants looked directly at me. Others looked away. Several appeared surprised. Perhaps they expected anger. Perhaps they expected confrontation. Instead, they heard conviction. There is a difference. Conviction does not need volume. Conviction does not require insults. Conviction speaks clearly and allows the truth to stand on its own. I wanted my words to reflect that principle. As I spoke, I noticed something interesting. Many of the people who had been laughing earlier were no longer smiling. Not because I had attacked them. I had not. Not because I had embarrassed them. That was not my goal. I believe it was because the conversation had suddenly become serious again. Mockery often survives in an atmosphere of carelessness. It becomes harder to sustain when someone calmly reminds a room of basic principles. Respect, dignity, conscience. Those ideas have weight. They force reflection. I continued by explaining that freedom includes the right to disagree. No one should be forced to believe. No one should be compelled to adopt a particular faith. But freedom also carries responsibility. A free society cannot survive if respect disappears. A diverse society cannot survive if contempt becomes acceptable. A world that values human dignity must extend that dignity to people whose beliefs differ from our own. Those words were not directed at one individual. They were directed at the atmosphere that had developed throughout the discussion. The problem extended beyond a single remark. It involved the attitude behind many remarks, an attitude suggesting that certain beliefs were undeserving of respect. I could not accept that, and I said so. For a few seconds after I finished speaking, no one responded. The silence felt unusually heavy. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was a reflective silence, the kind that appears when people are processing something unexpected. I stood quietly. I did not demand agreement. I did not seek applause. I simply allowed my words to remain in the room. Several participants lowered their eyes toward their notes. Others exchanged brief glances. A few nodded slightly. I do not know what they were thinking. Perhaps some agreed. Perhaps others disagreed. That was not my concern. My responsibility was not to control their reactions. My responsibility was to remain faithful to my conscience. That responsibility had guided my decision. As I remained standing, I felt a sense of peace. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Peace. There is a difference. Satisfaction often comes from winning an argument. Peace comes from knowing you acted according to your principles. At that moment, I felt peace. The decision had been made. The words had been spoken. What happened next no longer mattered as much as remaining true to what I believed. I reflected briefly on the many people who would never know exactly what occurred inside that room. The mothers praying for their families. The workers facing difficult circumstances. The elderly believers attending small churches. The young people searching for hope. Most would never hear every detail. Yet I wanted my actions to honor them. I wanted my actions to honor the principle that faith deserves respect even among those who do not share it. That principle was worth defending, not aggressively, not angrily, but clearly. The atmosphere remained still. The meeting seemed suspended between what had been happening and what would happen next. Everyone understood that a turning point had occurred. The discussion could not simply continue as before. Something had changed. And although I had spoken calmly, I knew another decision still remained. Standing was only the beginning. The question now was whether I would remain in the room. My conscience had already answered that question. I simply had not acted on the answer yet. That moment was approaching. Very soon I would take the next step. A step that required no shouting. A step that required no confrontation. A step that would communicate my position more clearly than any speech ever could. The room waited. The delegates watched. And I prepared to do what I believed conscience required. After I finished speaking, the room remained silent for several moments. It was the kind of silence that cannot be created intentionally. It appears only when people realize that something important has just happened. No one immediately responded. No one rushed to challenge what I had said. No one attempted to restart the discussion. The atmosphere felt completely different from the one that had existed only minutes earlier. The laughter had disappeared. The casual mockery had disappeared. The confidence with which certain remarks had been delivered seemed to have vanished. For a brief moment, everyone simply sat with the reality of the situation. I remained standing. My decision was already made. The words I had spoken were important, but they were not the most important part of what I intended to communicate. Sometimes actions speak more clearly than speeches. Sometimes leaving says more than remaining. Sometimes silence becomes stronger than debate. I believe this was one of those moments. I looked down at the documents in front of me. There were reports, briefing materials, notes, and schedules prepared for the remainder of the meeting. Hours earlier, those papers had seemed important. Now they seemed insignificant compared to the principle at stake. I gathered them calmly. There was no rush. There was no dramatic gesture. I simply collected my materials as one would at the conclusion of any ordinary meeting. Several people watched carefully. I could feel their attention. They understood what was happening. Some appeared surprised. Others appeared uncertain. A few seemed troubled. Yet no one spoke. The room remained unusually quiet. As I placed the documents together, I reflected on what had brought me to that point. I had traveled to Brussels in good faith. I had accepted the invitation sincerely. I had come hoping for dialogue. I had come hoping for cooperation. I had come hoping for meaningful discussions about issues affecting millions of lives. I had not come expecting perfection. No international gathering is perfect. No group of leaders agrees on everything. Disagreement is normal. Respectfully navigating disagreement is part of diplomacy. What I encountered, however, was not simply disagreement. It was contempt. And there comes a moment when participation itself becomes a choice. Remaining in a room communicates something. Leaving communicates something as well. I believed remaining would communicate the wrong message. I believed remaining would suggest that the mockery of deeply held beliefs was acceptable. My conscience would not allow that. So I prepared to leave. As I stepped away from my chair, I looked briefly across the hall. I saw officials who had spoken earlier. I saw advisors. I saw representatives from various countries. I saw people from different cultures and different backgrounds. Many were still watching. The expressions on their faces varied. Some seemed thoughtful. Some seemed confused. Some appeared uncomfortable. I do not claim to know what any of them were thinking. Perhaps some believed I was overreacting. Perhaps others believed I was doing the right thing. Perhaps many were simply surprised that someone had chosen to act rather than remain silent. Whatever their thoughts, my responsibility remained the same. I had to follow my conscience. Nothing else mattered more at that moment. I began walking toward the exit. The distance was not far, yet every step felt significant. Not because I was making a political statement, not because I was trying to attract attention, because each step represented a decision to place principle above convenience, a decision to place conscience above comfort, a decision to place respect above acceptance. As I walked, memories returned to me once again. I thought about the people whose faith had shaped their lives. I thought about the churches throughout Africa. I thought about believers throughout America. I thought about communities throughout the world. Different languages, different cultures, different histories, yet many united by faith in Jesus Christ. Those people were not present in the room, but they mattered. Their dignity mattered. Their convictions mattered. Their beliefs deserved respect. I reached the middle of the hall. The silence remained. No one attempted to stop me. No one called me back. No one demanded an explanation. I had already provided one. My words were on the record. My actions would now reinforce them. As I continued walking, I reflected on a lesson that leadership has taught me repeatedly. Not every battle should be fought through argument. Some battles are fought through example. Some messages are communicated through conduct. Some principles are defended simply by refusing to participate in what violates them. That was exactly what I was doing. I was not condemning every person in the room. I was not questioning the character of every delegate. I was responding to a specific atmosphere, a specific pattern of disrespect, a specific refusal to extend dignity toward beliefs held by millions. I could not endorse that atmosphere through my presence. Therefore, I chose absence. There is power in that choice. Modern society often encourages constant reaction. People are expected to argue endlessly, to attack, to insult, to escalate every disagreement. I have never believed that is the strongest response. Sometimes the strongest response is restraint. Sometimes the strongest response is dignity. Sometimes the strongest response is simply walking away, not out of weakness, out of conviction. That distinction is important. Walking away is not always surrender. Sometimes it is testimony. Sometimes it is evidence that certain principles matter more than participation. That day, leaving became my testimony. I approached the doors leading out of the conference hall. The closer I came, the greater my sense of peace became. That may seem strange. Many people assume difficult decisions create anxiety. Sometimes they do. But there are also moments when conscience removes uncertainty. Once you know what is right, the burden of indecision disappears. That is how I felt. I was no longer debating internally. The debate had ended. The decision had been made. I opened the door. The sounds of the conference room faded behind me. The corridor outside felt remarkably quiet. For the first time in hours, I was no longer listening to speeches. I was no longer listening to arguments. I was alone with my thoughts, and those thoughts were clear. I did not regret leaving. I did not question the decision. I did not wonder whether remaining would have been easier. Of course, remaining would have been easier. Many important decisions become difficult precisely because the easier option exists. The easier option would have been silence. The easier option would have been comfort. The easier option would have been staying seated and avoiding attention. Yet easy and right are not always the same. Leadership requires recognizing that difference. As I walked through the corridor, several members of my delegation caught up with me. They had witnessed everything. They understood why I had left. Very little needed to be said. Some moments require lengthy explanations. This was not one of them. The principle involved was simple. Respect matters. Faith deserves dignity. Conscience matters. Those truths did not require lengthy discussion. We continued walking. Behind us, the meeting continued. The agenda would move forward. Reports would be presented. Statements would be made. Life would go on. But for me, the most important part of the day was already over. The decision had been made. The line had been drawn. The message had been delivered. And that message was simple. There are times when remaining silent becomes impossible. There are times when conscience requires action. There are times when the most powerful statement a person can make is not through anger, argument, or confrontation. It is through the willingness to stand up and walk away. That is exactly what I did in Brussels. Not because I hated anyone, not because I wanted conflict, not because I believed myself superior. I left because my conscience would not permit me to stay. And even today, when I reflect on that moment, I remain convinced that it was the right decision. The meeting continued without me, but the lesson of that day remained with me. A lesson I would later share with Christians around the world. A lesson about courage. A lesson about dignity. A lesson about faith. And a lesson about what ordinary believers can do when confronted with disrespect toward what they hold sacred. That message would become the most important part of this story, and it is the message I want to share next. In the days that followed the meeting in Brussels, many people focused on one question. Why did I leave? Journalists discussed it. Political observers discussed it. Supporters and critics discussed it. Some praised the decision, others questioned it. Still others tried to interpret it through the lens of politics. I understood those reactions. Public events often generate different opinions. That is normal. But as I reflected on what had happened, I realized that the most important lesson was not about me. It was not about a conference. It was not about a particular group of officials. It was not even about Brussels. The deeper lesson concerned faith, conscience, and the way believers respond when something sacred is treated with disrespect. That is why I want to speak directly to Christians, not as a preacher, not as a theologian, not as someone claiming spiritual authority. I speak simply as a man who faced a moment of conscience and chose to follow it. There is something important that believers must understand. When Jesus Christ is mocked, ridiculed, or dismissed, the answer is not hatred. Hatred cannot defend faith. Hatred only creates more darkness. The answer is not violence. Violence cannot honor the teachings of Christ. The answer is not revenge. Revenge rarely strengthens truth. Instead, believers must respond in a way that reflects the very values they claim to defend. That is not always easy. In fact, it is often difficult. Human beings naturally want to react when something important to them is attacked. They want to argue. They want to fight. They want to prove others wrong. But faith requires something deeper. Faith requires discipline. Faith requires wisdom. Faith requires courage that remains calm even when emotions are strong. That is what I learned during that meeting. Many people assume courage means speaking loudly. Sometimes it does. Many people assume courage means confronting others aggressively. Sometimes it does not. Very often, courage appears in quieter forms. Courage is remaining respectful when others are not. Courage is remaining truthful when falsehood becomes popular. Courage is standing by convictions even when doing so creates discomfort. That was the type of courage I tried to practice in Brussels. I did not insult anyone. I did not attack anyone. I did not seek humiliation. I simply refused to participate in something I believed was wrong. There is a lesson in that. Christians today live in a world filled with disagreement. Different people hold different beliefs. Different cultures hold different values. Different societies view faith differently. Believers must learn how to navigate those realities without surrendering either truth or compassion. Neither extreme is healthy. Some people respond to disagreement with anger. Others respond by abandoning their convictions entirely. Both paths create problems. Faith should not become an excuse for hostility, but neither should it become so weak that it disappears whenever challenged. There must be another way. I believe that way begins with calm conviction. A believer should know what he believes. A believer should understand why he believes it. A believer should be able to speak honestly without becoming hateful. That combination is powerful. Truth and dignity together create a stronger witness than anger ever could. I have met many Christians throughout Africa who understand this principle. Some have endured hardship. Some have experienced persecution. Some have faced ridicule because of their faith. Yet many continue responding with grace. That does not mean they remain silent about everything. It means they choose their responses carefully. They understand that defending faith does not require becoming cruel. It requires remaining faithful. There is a difference. One of the things that troubled me most in Brussels was not merely the mockery itself. It was the assumption behind the mockery. The assumption that faith deserves less respect than other deeply held convictions. That assumption exists in many places today. Believers encounter it frequently. They are told that their values are outdated. They are told that their convictions are obstacles. They are told that their faith belongs in the past. Some eventually become discouraged. Some begin questioning whether speaking openly about faith is worthwhile. To those people, I want to say something clearly. Do not allow mockery to silence your convictions, but do not allow mockery to corrupt your character either. Remain faithful. Remain respectful. Remain truthful. Those principles matter. There is a temptation that often appears when believers feel attacked. The temptation is to imitate the behavior of those showing disrespect. That temptation should be resisted. If someone responds to contempt with contempt, nothing improves. If someone responds to hatred with hatred, hatred simply grows. The world already contains enough bitterness. The world already contains enough division. The world already contains enough anger. Christians should not contribute more. They should contribute something different. They should contribute integrity. They should contribute compassion. They should contribute courage guided by principle. I often think about the teachings that were being mocked during that meeting. Forgiveness, mercy, humility, truth. Those principles were treated as weaknesses by some speakers. Yet when I look at history, I see something very different. The people who changed the world for the better were often guided by those very values. Forgiveness has healed communities. Mercy has transformed lives. Humility has prevented countless conflicts. Truth has exposed injustice. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of strength, real strength, the kind of strength that lasts, the kind of strength that survives long after power and influence disappear. That is why Christians should never feel ashamed of those values. The world may mock them. Certain people may dismiss them. Some may even ridicule them openly, yet their value remains unchanged. Truth does not become false because someone laughs at it. Dignity does not disappear because someone mocks it. Faith does not lose meaning because someone rejects it. Those realities remain. Another lesson from Brussels concerns silence. Many people ask whether believers should always remain silent when faith is mocked. My answer is no. Silence is sometimes wise, but silence is not always the answer. There are moments when speaking becomes necessary. There are moments when conscience requires a response. The challenge is responding correctly. Not with rage, not with cruelty, not with hatred, but with calm conviction. That is what I attempted to do. I stood. I spoke respectfully. I explained my position. Then I left. For me, that was the appropriate response. Different situations may require different actions, but the principle remains. There are times when believers must respectfully say, I do not agree. There are times when believers must respectfully refuse participation. There are times when believers must choose conscience over convenience. That choice is not always easy. Sometimes it carries consequences. Sometimes it creates misunderstanding. Sometimes it attracts criticism. Yet conscience remet important. A society that ignores conscience eventually loses something essential. An individual who repeatedly ignores conscience eventually loses something essential as well. That is why I encourage believers to listen carefully to that inner voice. Not every emotion is conscience. Not every reaction is wisdom. But genuine conscience deserves attention. It helps guide us when circumstances become confusing. It helps guide us when social pressure becomes intense. It helps guide us when remaining silent seems easier than doing what is right. Looking back, I believe the most important aspect of that day was not my departure from the meeting. It was the reminder that faith should never be separated from character. A person can speak about faith endlessly while living without integrity. Such faith convinces few people. What influences others most is conduct, action, consistency, the willingness to live according to one's convictions. That is why I hope Christians focus less on winning arguments and more on living faithfully. A life of integrity speaks loudly. A life of compassion speaks loudly. A life of courage speaks loudly. Such a life becomes difficult to ignore. If believers want to defend their faith, they should begin there. Not merely with words, with example, not merely with declarations, with conduct, not merely with criticism of others, with faithfulness in their own lives. That witness carries tremendous power. More power than many realize. The world may not always listen to sermons, but it notices character. It notices courage. It notices dignity. Those qualities leave lasting impressions. That is the message I want Christians to remember. Do not respond to mockery with hatred. Do not respond to disrespect with violence. Do not allow the behavior of others to determine the quality of your own character. Instead, remain faithful. Remain calm. Remain courageous. Stand for what you believe. Speak when conscience requires it. And let your life reflect the values you claim to defend. That is the lesson I carried away from Brussels. Yet there is one final message I want to share. A simple message. A practical message. A message about what believers should actually do when confronted with disrespect toward Jesus Christ. Because knowing what not to do is only part of the answer. Knowing what to do matters just as much. And that is where this story ultimately leads. As I bring this story toward its conclusion, I want to leave you with a simple thought. The events in Brussels were not important because of the building where they occurred. They were not important because of the titles held by the people in attendance. They were important because they raised a question that ordinary believers face every day. What should a Christian do when Jesus Christ is mocked? What should a believer do when faith becomes the target of ridicule? What should a person do when conscience says something is wrong? These questions matter, not only for leaders, not only for public figures, for everyone. The answer I arrived at in Brussels was not complicated. In fact, it was remarkably simple. Do not respond with hatred. Do not respond with violence. Do not surrender your dignity. Those three principles matter more than many people realize. Hatred often disguises itself as strength, but hatred rarely strengthens anything. It usually destroys. Violence often disguises itself as courage, but violence rarely persuades anyone. It usually deepens division. And when people lose their dignity, they often lose the very thing they are trying to defend. That is why Christians must be careful. When confronted with disrespect, it becomes easy to react emotionally. It becomes easy to say things that should not be said. It becomes easy to mirror the behavior of those acting without respect. Resist that temptation. Do not allow another person's conduct to control your own. Your character should not depend on the behavior of those around you. Your principles should not disappear simply because someone challenges them. Remain faithful to what is right. That is where true strength begins. Many years from now, people may forget the details of a particular meeting. They may forget the names of certain officials. They may forget specific speeches, but they will remember examples. They will remember courage. They will remember integrity. And they will remember individuals who remained faithful to their convictions when doing so became difficult. Every believer has opportunities to provide such examples, not necessarily on an international stage, most often in ordinary life, at work, at home, in conversation, in communities, in moments when no cameras are present. Those moments matter. Sometimes they matter more than public events. A person does not need political influence to defend dignity. A person does not need fame to demonstrate conviction. A person does not need authority to choose integrity. Those choices belong to everyone. When someone speaks disrespectfully about your faith, begin with calmness. Do not surrender your peace. Do not surrender your self-control. Do not allow anger to become your guide. Instead, remember who you are. Remember what you believe. Remember the values you claim to represent. Then, if necessary, speak. Not aggressively, not arrogantly, simply truthfully. There is power in a respectful statement. A person can say, I do not agree. A person can say, I believe that deserves respect. A person can say, those beliefs are important to me. Such words do not require hostility, yet they still communicate conviction. Too often people imagine only two options: silence or conflict, submission or confrontation. In reality, there is another path. The path of calm courage, the path of respectful conviction, the path of dignity. That is the path I tried to follow in Brussels, and it is the path I encourage others to follow as well. There may also be moments when speaking is not enough. There may be moments when remaining present begins to communicate acceptance. There may be moments when conscience says it is time to leave. If that moment comes, do not be afraid. Leaving does not always mean surrender. Sometimes leaving becomes testimony. Sometimes walking away communicates more than remaining. Sometimes absence speaks more loudly than argument. That is exactly what happened during the meeting. I did not leave because I hated anyone. I did not leave because I wished to create division. I left because conscience would not permit me to stay. That distinction is important. Christians should examine their motives carefully. Actions rooted in pride often create harm. Actions rooted in anger often create regret. But actions rooted in conscience can become powerful witnesses. That is why self-examination matters. Before responding to any situation, ask yourself a simple question. Am I trying to honor God or merely win an argument? The answer to that question changes everything. Winning arguments may satisfy pride. Honoring God requires character. Winning arguments may produce temporary victories. Character produces lasting influence. People often remember how we behaved long after they forget what we said. Never underestimate the importance of that truth. Another lesson I learned concerns courage. Many people misunderstand courage. They imagine courage means never feeling uncertainty. That is not true. Courage often appears alongside uncertainty. Courage means acting according to conviction, despite discomfort. Courage means remaining faithful despite pressure. Courage means choosing what is right even when what is right becomes unpopular. Every generation requires that type of courage. Our generation is no exception. Believers throughout the world face pressures of different kinds. Some face ridicule. Some face misunderstanding. Some face social pressure. Others face far greater challenges. Yet the principle remains the same. Remain faithful. Remain respectful. Remain courageous. Do not allow fear to silence truth. But do not allow frustration to corrupt truth either. Hold both conviction and compassion together. The world needs both. As I think back to that day in Brussels, one image remains with me. It is not the conference hall. It is not the officials. It is not the speeches. The image that remains is much simpler. It is the image of ordinary believers. People praying quietly. People raising families. People serving their communities. People trying to live faithfully despite difficult circumstances. Those people rarely receive public recognition. Yet they are often the strongest examples of faith. They continue loving. They continue forgiving. They continue hoping. They continue believing. Even when the world around them becomes cynical. Even when others mock what they hold sacred. Even when faith seems unfashionable. They remain faithful. That faithfulness matters. More than many people realize. The future of any society depends not only on leaders but also on ordinary people who refuse to abandon what is good. People who refuse to abandon truth. People who refuse to abandon dignity. People who refuse to abandon compassion. Those are the people who strengthen communities. Those are the people who preserve hope. Those are the people who help heal a wounded world. If someone insults Jesus Christ tomorrow, remember this story. Not because it involves me, because it involves a principle. Do not answer with hatred. Do not answer with violence. Do not lose your dignity. Instead, stand calmly. Speak truthfully. Remain faithful. And if conscience tells you that you cannot remain where disrespect has become acceptable, then have the courage to step away. Sometimes standing up is a testimony. Sometimes speaking is a testimony. And sometimes walking away is the strongest testimony of all. That was the lesson I learned in Brussels. That was the choice I made. And that is the message I leave with every believer who hears this story. There are moments when faith is tested. There are moments when character is tested. There are moments when conscience is tested. When those moments come, choose dignity. Choose truth. Choose courage. Choose faith. Because in the end, the most powerful witness is not found in anger, noise, or conflict. It is found in a life that remains faithful when remaining faithful becomes difficult. And on that day in Brussels, that is what I tried to do. After everything that happened, I came away from that day with a deeper understanding of something I have believed for many years. Power alone cannot save humanity. Money alone cannot save humanity. Political influence alone cannot save humanity. Without faith, compassion, integrity, and moral courage, even the strongest institutions eventually become weak. The world today carries many burdens. We see conflict where there should be peace. We see division where there should be understanding. We see hatred where there should be compassion. Too many people are losing hope because they believe darkness is becoming stronger than light. I do not believe that. I still believe that goodness matters. I still believe that truth matters. I still believe that faith matters. And I still believe that ordinary people can help make the world better through the choices they make every day. My hope is simple. I pray for Burkina Faso. I pray for Africa. I pray for the people of the United States. And I pray for people everywhere who are trying to live with dignity, honesty, and compassion. Let us reject what is evil. Let us turn away from greed. Let us resist hatred. Let us refuse to allow anger to define our lives. Instead, let us choose kindness. Let us choose forgiveness. Let us choose humility. Let us choose to help one another whenever we can. No matter how difficult circumstances become, never abandon hope. Never believe that darkness has the final word. There is always light for those who continue to carry faith within their hearts. There is always hope for those who continue to choose what is right. And there is always strength for those who refuse to surrender their conscience. May God be with Burkina Faso. May God be with Africa. May God be with the United States. And may God be with people throughout the world. If you also believe in goodness, hope, and faith, I invite you to leave a prayer, encourage someone who needs hope, and continue sharing light wherever you go. Thank you for listening to my story, and may peace be with you.